Hi, I'm Tim of the 1916 Company announcing our all-new 1916 Company app. Check out our all-new community features, including wrist time, where you can log the watch you wear, how often you wear your watches, and see a graphical representation of how you use your collection. But wait, there's more, because this wrist time feature allows you to post in real time to our live feed of user wrist shots. Our community functions also include professionally moderated discussions, all sorts of views, debate, insights into what people want to say about the watches of our times, and all your favorite features are coming back, including media, editorial from Jack Forster, video from yours truly. You can continue to build your online collection and your wish list, plus all the commercial features are back. Buy, trade, and sell through the app, browse our global inventory of pre-owned and new watches. A wrist shot could begin the process of a trade or a purchase. Find the 1916 Company app on the Apple App Store and Google.
Hello and welcome to the 1916 podcast. I'm Tim Masso here with Armand Johnston. Today we have many topics on the burner. We've got the question, what does vintage mean in 2025? Definitions, examples, and maybe some unorthodox opinions. We are going to be destroying the icons. It's iconoclastic and vintage. How do we feel about wearing gold, white, rose, yellow, and two-tone? Some say it's a vintage look, some say it's coming back. Others say that it's appropriate in situ, but not in general. Which watches, this is our third topic, are most in need of a redesign for 2026? All of this today on the 1916 Company podcast. Remember, reach out to podcasts at the1916company.com if you have topics, suggestions, or questions for future episodes. So Armand, I'm going to throw this to you, but I'm going to frame it a little bit differently. We're going to start with like a conclusion and work back. What is the newest watch that can be considered vintage under any definition?
The newest watch to me that can be considered vintage in this, the glorious year of 2025, I think can be no newer than 1999.
Okay, that's interesting because I tend to look at vintage in terms of obviously the classics. So anything made before the quartz era, your JLC Deep Sea Alarm, your Rolex Big Crown Submariner, your Patek Philippe 1518, all that stuff pre-quartz crisis is like, your interwar Bugattis. The Bugattis, the Lagondas, the Bentleys, the Duesenbergs, made before World War II. Those things will always be the apex of car collecting. And they're on the lawn in Pebble now. They were 50 years ago. They will be in 100 years. But I also think we've got this sort of like neo-vintage class.
So I did want to talk about that.
Let's talk about that.
I do have feelings about that, and I think that as we add verbiage, things like neo-vintage, that phrase has only been out for 5 years. We've only been talking about quote-unquote neo-vintage watches since 2020, basically.
I agree with that.
And I would say that phrase, and this is an opinion of mine, so please grain of salt this. That phrase, I think, our collectors, and I include myself in this, our collectors needing something before watches they remember being in regular production become vintage. So what I mean by that is neo-vintage came about for watches of the 90s. Now, I'm a believer in vintage really doesn't start until it's at least 25 years old. And, vintage also ends when something is maybe, 80 to 100 years old. It becomes an antique at that point.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. I didn't realize that you could age out of vintage status.
I think you can age out of vintage because I think there is a Rubicon of vintage and antique.
Okay. Well, let's explore that separately, too. So let's stick with what is the newest watch that can be vintage. Now, tell me about where this 1999 business comes from.
So I view the 90s as, A, a very interesting period for design, but B, I view the 90s as something that we're looking back on now as not that long ago, and 1990 was 35 years ago. 1999 was 26 years ago. We are crossing, time thresholds that, they're really shocking to me actually as I go through them because it's remarkable to see the way that time passes. But I think, if you had talked to me 5 years ago or 10 years ago and talked, hey, what's a vintage watch? I'm saying something from the 70s or 80s. However, I think you need to add time to that as time passes. As 10 years have gone by since 2015, we need to add 10 years onto the 70s or 80s, right? So, I mean, I could see the argument for 90 to 99 being quote unquote neo vintage, but I still view it as this, and this is new vintage.
Here's a question. Is this term neo vintage something that was just invented by dealers to sell you something for more money?
Sure. Sure.
I love that. You're right out of the gate. Yes.
And I like neo vintage watches, and I like the term. I like the phrase. I think it's cool. I think it represents a very specific era. And I think, I think the neo vintage of 10 years from now is going to be 2008 to 2015, And so the neo vintage for me now is 2000 to 2008.
Okay, now that's interesting because I take sort of a trial judge's kind of approach to defining what a vintage watch is, where you take more of like a regulator's approach. So regulators have to draw lines, otherwise you can't have rules. Whereas judges are like, well, there are 5 factors that determine whether this is an antitrust case.
I get that.
And, so I come from this sort of standpoint where I've said for a long time, and we'll come back to this idea whether this neo vintage thing is just solely marketing. But I've always said that if a watch is dramatically different than the kind of watches available today, if it is now a distinct and bygone era, either in style or engineering or size, that makes it a great candidate to be vintage. If it's dramatically different from what its own manufacturer is building today, like there's a hard and fast break between the past and the present. Think like
Invicta.
Yes. I mean, yes. but I would think maybe a little bit more subtle, like the shift from brass movements to gold movements at F. Vacheron, that sort of thing. And then finally, if there's something about the watch that ties it to a different era that is just so idiosyncratic, you can only think of it in terms of vintage. Think along the lines of a genuine radioactive loomed dial. That sort of thing, which you just don't, unless it's a Trezor and Luminox or ball, you don't see that anymore. Like open, unencapsulated radioactive loom activator, that makes it feel like a vintage watch to me. But under that definition, like an H series Panerai submersible from 2005 would be a candidacy for vintage. You'd actually have a case to be made there.
See, for me, that's the neo vintage.
Okay. So that's sort of how I applied. Is there something incredibly anachronistic about the watch? Is it characteristic of a bygone era of watchmaking in general? Or is there something that makes it so different from the current watches built by its maker that there is just a chasm between past and present? So that's like my 3-point touch test.
What about that Panerai puts it in that category for you?
For me, the fact that it's a genuine tritium dial, that it's not a Trezor, it's not encapsulated in glass, it's actual radioactive paint. That seems incredibly weird and kooky and so different from what Panerai makes today. Today, you can get like a dynamo-lit Panerai for a lot of money.
Yeah.
You can't get a tritium-lit Panerai for any amount of money, and those dials are worth a lot if they haven't been replaced. Like, there's actual collectability there.
That's a fair point. And seeing the sliding scale of vintage per brand based off of those factors is very interesting too, because like we can talk about Longa. By those factors, Longa doesn't have any. Well, yeah, actually, by those factors, Longa doesn't really have any vintage watches.
Well, think about this: solid caseback Longa from the 90s.
But that's not a tech change. That's not engineering. That's not.
But that's where you have my point, where it's of a different era.
I get that, but they've done modern solid caseback pieces.
True, but it was standard that way.
Fair.
So, and
very fair.
Yeah, I think that if you're talking about something like the original Arcade, which was so small,
love the watch by the way,
and yellow gold and solid cased back, to me that feels vintage.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
But I would say this, the thing about Longa that confuses everything is that a lot of their 90s models, at least as model lines, they're still around.
Yeah.
There's a very similar to 1994 Longa 1 in production today. There's
borderline carbon copy. I mean, it is very similar.
The Saxonias are very similar. By the late 90s, we've got a recognizable dotograph. So, I could see that's a little bit more difficult to determine. But I do think that when you're looking at, something dramatically different, like the steel loaner watches, the service loaner watches, or you're looking at the solid case back longas, you get a case, there's like a point to be made that this could be called vintage. So that's sort of where I feel, you define vintage, which is not great because then that requires you to make a judgment call.
Well, that's the thing, vintage, I think to a lot of people largely has become kind of a, forgive the phrase, kind of a vibe thing. If it's giving vintage vibes, yeah, absolutely.
So, this is like the problem. Like, again, you're taking like the regulatory approach. It's like, well, look, we either allow or we don't allow assisted suicide. But now we have some person who's like, well, is there sufficient suffering? Is it an act of mercy? You start applying all of these soft
Filters.
criteria, yeah. And all of a sudden, it's not like a black and white decision. So I do like the idea of just having a cutoff 1999, and that feels right to me. It just makes it difficult to explain early works by modern independents like Bjorn or de Bethune or Grubel Forsey, or even a lot of what Roger W. Smith did in his earliest days.
Yeah.
Are these truly modern watches, the last of these Daniels watches?
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
I think that's where you run into a problem when you've got these brands that have only existed roughly since the millennium, and they have come so far so fast that the stuff they were making back then looks incredibly dated.
You could have a Frank Mueller discussion about it as well. That's interesting.
An Urwerk that doesn't have a completely open, visible carousel, that has a very small slit window. Yeah. Like that's sort of how I see that. So I think this works best, this hard and fast line in the sand you've got, for long-running established brands, whereas it's a lot tougher when, unless you want to just decide that nothing, even if it is an early work of an independent, if we just say, look, it's 99 or it's not, then the very earliest works by these indies, another great example would be Richard Mille and the first pieces off the line.
Yeah, wow.
We just have to say, look, it doesn't matter. None of them are vintage.
Yeah. Well, no, there are no vintage de Bethunes.
Yeah.
By that. But again, a DB1 is a really, by your definitions, is considered a vintage piece potentially.
Yeah, I mean, you ask, like, is it very different from the kind of watches we buy today? Well, it's got these Breguet hands and Roman numerals, and it's yellow gold. Yeah, it's a very frumpy looking thing compared to what they do today. And that might be more appealing to you if you don't like the more avant-garde.
I love that case.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people do love the DB1 case, but that's for a more conservative taste in watches, that's more appealing. But it's so different from what they're doing today that it meets one of my criteria of being very different, like black and white between what they did then and what they did now. It also feels like something that was more appropriate to an industry of 2002. The solid case back, so many of them being silver dial, Roman numeral, yellow gold. That's just not where the market is today. You release something like that today, and people would be like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, that's like the third we want white gold, we want platinum, we want dark dials, we want colorful dials. No one's asking for this sort of neo Breguet style.
Yeah, the classic quote unquote gold watch aesthetic.
Yeah, and so I really do like that idea, but here's a question: why 1999 and not 2000?
So a couple of things. For one thing, the 25-year span I think there is a technical vintage definition for some subsect of collecting that I read somewhere that was a 25-year span. Anything 25 years or older is vintage. But that's basically where the cutoff is. Now, in terms of moving forward, I think there has to be like a 5-year buffer, right? Like, I don't think, we start considering, when 2026 happens, I don't think 2001 magically becomes vintage. But when 2030 happens, I think 25 years ago then becomes vintage. Does that make sense?
So it is a moving target.
It is.
But that moving target will always have a firm and fast line.
I think so. I think you can at least easily apply a line to it. So for 2025 to 2030, your basement is 2000.
Okay, so now talk to me about this whole idea of antique watches being older than vintage.
Yeah, so I think I don't know that there's necessarily a line in the sand for a delineation of this, but I think once you approach 100 years old, I think you cross the Rubicon from the vintage to antique. I think there is a different type of appreciation, a different type of maintenance of the good itself, and a style that I don't want to say is so far removed from the modern, but it's a style that hasn't been in the forefront for a very long time.
Can we agree that anything made as a pocket watch or converted from a pocket watch is an antique?
Yes.
And like 1920s and 30s cushion cases.
A bubble back antique.
Okay, a bubble back's an antique. So then this is maybe less of a line in the sand and more of a. I mean, how would you define an antique? Because I feel like we've got these.
So this
the bubble back is now a water-resistant automatic watch. That feels more modern than a pocket watch, definitely.
It definitely. I think it definitely has to do with the overall age in particular. I think it definitely has to do with. You mentioned, a fundamental difference in manufacturing. I think it crosses that into a fundamental difference of era of whatever it is. So like, an antique wristwatch, for example, is going to be very small for the most part. Whereas, you fast forward 30 years and a 33 millimeter watch is the new high. You fast forward another 30 years, it's 36. So I think if you take a true antique wristwatch, it's going to be, 30 millimeters in that range. Not to say that's the rule, but just the idea of the style
fair.
at that time. Same thing with pocket watches. The style
like
at that
any
time.
Rolex in a quote unquote boy's size. Like it's a terminology and a class of watch they wouldn't even make today.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And I think too, seeing the shift of pocket watches, because pocket watches were still around in the 20s and 30s, but seeing the shift out of that being the norm is a step. So I view that as kind of another, not to overuse the word, another Rubicon of this antique.
Okay, so let's think of it maybe this way. So I have heard, and I'm not sure what the source is here, but I've heard it said that sometime between 1937 and 1939, wristwatches finally overtook pocket watches in popularity for good. At least maybe it was in terms of sales. I don't know how you would figure this out because it was not a global market and records weren't well kept. But let's say that is true. That would mean that prior to about 1939, we've got a couple things going on. Pocket watches, which we consider to be antiques. There have been modern pocket watches, but for the most part...
Tech still makes pocket watches.
Yeah, but for the most part, antique.
Mm-hmm.
Also, wristwatches from the era when the format of the wristwatch itself was not yet settled. So like before we knew for a fact that round cases were going to be the default, before we knew for a fact that automatic movements were going to predominate.
Water resistance.
Yeah. Or if they have some transitional feature like a wristwatch converted from a pocket watch. Or the bubble back. I think the best argument there would be they were only bubble backed because these cases were not originally intended to accommodate a winding rotor. So a bigger case back was made, which gave them a bubble back to include the automatic winding system. By the 1950s, just about every new automatic Rolex and automatic watch being built was built with automatic winding in mind. So there weren't any proportional oddities. So that transition in case design, in dial style, in technology that came during the late pocket watch era, maybe that marks those wristwatches as an antique.
I think that's a very sober and concise way of saying something I was trying to do in a roundabout way. I appreciate that.
And really, you could also just say, if we want to draw a line in the sand, before World War II.
Yeah, and I think I think that is before our common era. Like that is like a major a major shift in a lot of things, in production, in manufacturing in general, and that is global.
Yeah, back before you expected any degree of water resistance in a watch. Any watch made with a crystal before plexiglass, something like that. Yeah.
And to that point, it's so funny to think like how maintenance of these watches has changed. You know, in the 30s, if your crystal fogged up, you'd bring it down to the guy downtown, and he'd, I don't know, spray WD-40 in it, dry it out, and give it back to you. You know,
Oh, yeah.
it was very much a spit and glue type of maintenance. And it's sorry, I don't mean to go off topic with this, but it's just it's so funny to see how far we have come in the watch industry for something like that.
It really is interesting when you think about it. Prior to 1940, most watches were probably built on the assumption that they were unlikely to ever come back to their manufacturers for service. The idea behind building all these pocket watches in America for the railroad was that local servicemen and people hired by the railroad to maintain the watches would be doing the service. A lot of these European watch brands sending stuff to other countries assumed that local watchmakers using universal tools and more or less interchangeable parts would see to the service. They didn't expect that if they made 5,000 watches in a year, all 5,000 of those watches would eventually come back for factory service. The idea used to be more or less like car makers build their cars. Even today, you don't expect at the Rouge River plant at Ford that a truck is going to come back to be serviced on the assembly line where it was built. That's unheard of.
Yeah.
The watch industry operated like that.
And it was such a different shape of an animal then, because the businesses obviously still had quality control that they were worried about, but after sales service, and honestly, this is why we're seeing in 2025 service being such a dirty word in the watch industry. We recently completed a service center, and we are one of the few major retailers to have a major service center.
Oh yeah, and the certifications just to get the parts accounts is ridiculous. I bet back in the 1930s, if you wanted Omega parts,
you could just call.
You wrote a letter to Omega. They're like,
Yep.
"Oh, we're so happy you like our watch. Here's some parts," and they send you an invoice. So yeah, I mean, it was a different era in all regards. Okay, so one element of vintage and antique watches, but by no means universal, but oftentimes they're in yellow gold because that used to be the gold by default. Why would you wear white gold that didn't communicate your wealth and your means? And so let's talk now about how do we feel about wearing gold in 2025? Where is the gold watch buyer today?
I want to start this off by saying today, and pulling back the veil, I'm sorry to the people behind the scenes. Today is September 24th. We were recording at about 2 o'clock, and the price of gold is $3,761.20 per ounce. This is up significantly. This is not quite the all-time high. It was at $3,800 a couple of days ago. But it's really outrageous when you see that because it puts the material on a pedestal. And I think, we all know I'm a gold guy. I love gold. I love yellow gold. It is, I wear.
It's the Italian part of you.
It's the Italian part of me. I wear gold chains. I like my yellow gold ring. I love gold. Gold never makes me feel uncomfortable. And quite honestly, I get that it's ostentatious. I really do. I really do. I love it.
Now, here's how I feel about gold. I'm wearing a gold watch right now. I got my DBD. It's white gold. This is the kind of gold you wear for yourself. The yellow gold you wear for yourself, but it's also style. Style has many different purposes. It's outwardly directed and inwardly directed. White gold is only inwardly directed. There's the thing about gold that's interesting. So over the years, many gold watches, pocket watches and wrist watches, have fallen victim to periodic spikes in the price of gold. And that's happening again now.
Yep.
And I know particularly a lot of dealers in the watch space who have slow-moving full bracelet gold watches are melting down bracelets in particular right now to cash in.
Which is wild. Wild.
Extremely. I mean, if it's an old gold Rolex bracelet, it's going nowhere. If it's an old Patek bracelet, especially one that's integrated on a watch, it's going nowhere. But if you've got some weird frumpy like Corum gold bracelet,
that are work of art
from the 80s, yeah. I'm sorry to say it, like all the stuff that was exquisitely goldsmithed is getting like melted down now.
And that's such a shame because you nailed it when you said exquisitely goldsmithed. I mean, we're talking about jewelry-esque bracelets on, little manual wine watches that would make you faint. I mean, the amount of work, the amount of time spent, the amount of hand human hours made in some of these bracelets is it's staggering. And they might be out of style, and yes, they are. Don't get me wrong. But they're remarkable. They're remarkable. I was trying on a Piaget in the vault earlier today. White gold, full bracelet, 28 millimeter. I would wear it, and I wouldn't be embarrassed in any setting.
Okay, so I'm not going to name names or point fingers, but I know that in the last couple of weeks, a dealer of which I'm aware had a slow-moving JLC Odysseus perpetual calendar from the 80s, and it had a incredibly intricate co-molded rose and yellow gold link bracelet on it. I don't mean that they were pinned together. I mean that the yellow and the rose gold were co-molded and cast as a single unit on each link, like the Rolex Tridor. And this dealer reckoned that the bracelet was 3 to 4 ounces, melted it down. And the number of Odysseus made, very low. The number made with that bracelet, lower still. Now there's one less in the world, and it broke my heart.
That's brutal to hear things like that. And it's, yeah.
All for 10 grand in raw gold.
Man. I just that hurts me.
But I know they had that watch, and I can't tell whether it was not selling because the Odysseus was kind of offbeat and weird and a vintage style, a taste that has been lost to the modern era, or if it was just the fact that being all gold and an obscure model from a niche brand like JLC, it was just hard to justify the price of the watch with all of that precious metal. And you can find a buyer for the watch, and you can find a buyer who's good for the money, but will it necessarily be the same person? In that case, I don't think it was, and that's why the bracelet was melted.
Yeah, that's fair. It's just, yeah.
I would also say this to all you guys who think you're making a fortune in gold right now. Keep in mind, Armand mentioned that $3,800 number from a few days back, and we are shooting this on the 24th of September. When that number was hit, it broke the inflation-adjusted value record for an ounce of gold that was set in, I believe, 1980. So this idea that you're making a fortune on gold, you may not be.
You're absolutely not, honestly, in terms of gold as an investment. The idea with the gold price going up, the gold is not worth more in value. It is worth more dollars,
yes.
USD, which ultimately, of course, rises the price of gold globally. However, you should really look at gold as a straight line and the dollar being the thing fluctuating.
Yeah, I would say, let me just double check this, but I would say the value of the S&P 500
always outpaces gold.
Let's say in December 1980, back when that gold was spiking, it would have been, December 31st, 1980, it was about $136. And then today, of course, you look at the value of the S&P 500, and as the ticker scrolls by in real time, the S&P 500 is $6,634. So you're doing much better than if you had melted down gold. What I'm getting at here is don't melt your gold watches.
Yeah, no,
buy stock.
It's never a good move. And there are in fact very few watches that are worth more in gold weight than they are complete.
So now back to how we feel about gold. Here's how I feel about yellow gold. I think it works best in small doses. So smaller cases, watches without bracelets, unless you're going full Piaget or, Corum, some sort of watch where style is the first, second, and third reason you buy the watch. I would also say it looks great on vintage pieces. I would have no qualms about wearing a 1955 Vacheron anniversary piece that's 33 millimeters, beautifully faceted, JLC powered, and yes, yellow gold. I think that works great. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm a dragon. The more gold, the better. It's one of those things where I want a gold bracelet watch desperately. I think it's kind of one of those for lack of a better phrase, it's an egotistical "I made it" moment. You know,
That's fair. So let me ask you this then: why does it seem that it's more acceptable to wear full gold than two-tone?
I don't think it is.
You don't think so?
No.
Like, you don't think that?
I think in terms of acceptability, it's a style thing for most people, and two-tone. I mean, two-tone has gone in and out of style 4 times since we've been sitting in this room. Like
That's true.
It's every 30 seconds it's either in or it's not, and it has been that way since it was the hottest thing on the planet in the 80s. You know.
I would say this. The interesting thing about two-tone is that if you use one of those barometers for the watch market, like the Rolex Daytona, the 5-digit and the 6-digit Daytonas in two-tone are still the value center of the Daytona market for some reason. Going back to the Zenith era, if you got a two-tone Zenith-powered Daytona, you have something that's probably easier to get into than full gold or steel.
And you can get beautiful dials. I mean, actually, one of my favorite watches is the 16523 with a black dial. It's steel and gold, 5-digit. Black dial, it's beautiful. They're available through Rolex Certified Pre-Owned program for around $20,000.
It does look like there's a long-term decaying orbit around two-tone, and I can't really figure out why. And part of me wonders if it's just dated in a way we haven't found endearing yet. Like, we look at the 80s and the 90s, and I think for the most part, it's fair to say that cars from the 80s and the 90s are now highly collectible. Various types of fashion have come back. Watches from the period are increasingly valuable. But one thing that feels as aged as like Mozilla or Netscape Navigator, like old in a uncool way, is like yellow and steel two-tone. Like a small 35 millimeter yellow and steel Cartier Pasha from the 90s. Like, no one's beaten down the door for that. It's a fine watch, but it's just, it's on the outs.
I have to feel like it's watch dependent.
Okay, I could see that. But Cartier is a great brand, and the Pasha's pretty well regarded. It feels like it's a good setup for a collectible.
I'll tell you. I'll counter that with the same brand, Panther.
Okay.
A two-tone Panther will never go out of style.
Okay, you see, but when I think, the Panther, I think, full gold.
I think full gold too. I know.
Gordon Gekko.
I know.
And
It's either
Pierce Brosnan too.
or Mick Jagger in full steel.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. So I would also say this about two-tone. A lot of times people find it more bearable when the colored gold is inside the watch, when it's hands, indices. Like, I know a lot of guys who can live with that, but not when it's crowns and bracelets.
I
and
don't call that
ports.
two-tone.
You don't consider that
No,
two-tone?
that is not two-tone.
Okay.
Two-tone has to be case bezel bracelet crown. Has to be. Because other than that, I know it's gold, but we're talking gilt at that point.
Okay.
That's how I view it. Not saying it's right or wrong, but take the Black Bay 58 GMT. Gilt hands, kind of gilt dial. No gold elsewhere. You wouldn't call that two-tone.
No, and I guess all of the kind of premium Panerai with gold-plated hands, I wouldn't call that two-tone. There are two tones, but not in the sense that we're using it.
Yeah, I think when you refer two-tone, I think it has to refer to at least the case, crown, bezel.
I will also say this, two-tone is not exclusively yellow, gold, and steel.
No.
Some two-tone is rose gold, and we see a lot more rose and steel, and I think that feels much more modern and has much broader embrace.
Rose and steel, rose and silver we see, tantalum and rose. We see titanium tantalum rose. We see titanium and tantalum. We see titanium and platinum. There's a wide range of two-tone.
I'm not sure I consider two white metals to be two-tone.
So if we're talking platinum and palladium, I agree. If we're talking titanium and platinum, I disagree.
Okay, so like an AP that's titanium and platinum, that's two-tone.
That's two-tone to me.
Do you think it doesn't come down more to the way that they're finished? One is polished and one is brushed?
I think there is enough difference in the metal material, actually. I do.
Okay, you're talking about like one of those IP suffix.
Yep, literally, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like one of those IP suffix Royal Oaks.
I don't think that it's necessarily the lowest hanging fruit two-tone. I think it's the equivalent to two-tone white gold.
All right, I would say that rose gold right now is probably the gold with the most momentum behind it. And I don't think it's close. There's a lot of rose gold.
No, I completely agree.
Look at how many rose golds with names we have. We have Rolex Ever Rose. We have Omega Sedna Gold. We have Panerai Oro Rosso. We have Hublot King Gold. I feel like it goes on and on and on. F. Pigeon calls his rose gold 6N. I've seen 3, 4, 5, and I've never seen anyone else claim to make 6N. So we have all of these branded rose golds, which tells me rose gold is cool.
Yes, rose gold is absolutely the it colored metal right now. I think I think yellow gold always maintains a kind of the same level in the respect of gold. I don't think it waxes too much. I don't think it wanes too much. I think white gold goes with the economy, and I think rose gold is widely accepted.
Okay, and I would agree with that too. And I even think that there's a lot of momentum behind that, because in the case of things I wouldn't necessarily buy myself, but when you see gold-plated watches, typically in the micro brand space right now, it's almost always rose gold plated.
Yeah, and that is a hard 180 from 15 years ago, where it was always gold plated.
So here's where I stand.
Yellow gold.
Yeah, on gold today, if you're going to buy yellow gold, I think your best option is to go get a Charles Frodsham double impulse chronometer, because they have an incredible yellow gold watch that uses 22 karat yellow gold. It's an incredible look. It's got a porcelain dial. Get it with the Royal Warrant ciphers. So cool. For me, the ultimate yellow gold watch, I'm going to go counter to everything I said. It's a Patek Philippe 5070 in yellow gold.
Yeah.
The 1998 version of it. Black dial, yellow gold, so much power. Yeah, it's a huge yellow gold watch, and I just said I don't like that. But in this case, I have to say that is the one for me. In terms of white gold, boom, right there. Garrett, you don't even have to find a graphic. I'm wearing it on my wrist. I love white gold. I think white gold's fantastic, second only to platinum. And in terms of rose gold, I really got to think about that. But I would actually say that I enjoy a rose gold. No, you know what? I'm going to just say I like a smaller rose gold watch. The 1994 Reverso Repetition. That's my rose gold watch. And then finally, a big, crazy mutant, the 18 karat yellow gold Hublot Mecha 10 Magic Gold. The bronze, bronze-looking ceramic hardness yellow gold. So that's gold for me today.
Those are amazing picks.
What are your yellow, rose, and white gold picks?
Yellow, I have to follow you with 5070. I could not agree more. Perfectly said. Rose gold is a tough one for me, and it is definitely a boutique edition FP Journe of some sort. I feel like I would really love a boutique Centigraph, which would be rose gold black dial. And to speak to that, I don't love rose gold on my skin. I love FP Journe rose gold. White gold, honestly, I think you open yourself up to, get yourself a bracelet with white gold, I don't know, something weird. I don't remember if it was white gold or platinum, but could you imagine just the malachite dial Seamaster 300 in white gold?
Oh my gosh.
It would be awesome.
Oh my gosh.
So cool. That
Yes.
might have been a platinum watch, actually, now that I think about it.
Oh, I'm going to add one. That I didn't think of. The blue dial rose gold Vacheron Overseas on a blue rubber strap.
Oh, yeah, that's a good watch.
Okay, there's my rose gold watch right there. My contemporary
Vacheron's rose is beautiful, actually. Gorgeous.
It's a red gold. They don't advertise it that way, but it's a red gold.
So that's like a 4N?
Even 5, yeah.
Okay,
I think
yeah.
they call it 5. So that's where we stand on gold. We got a few more things going on today, though. We're not done. Which watches are most in need of a redesign for 2026?
I know that Royal Oak has been redesigned. I know that it's been touched. I don't feel like 15500 is the Royal Oak that it could be. I think Golden Age Royal Oak to me is 15300. That might be a little bit divisive, as I think a lot of people would say 15202 or something of the like. I think the 15500 and Royal Oak at large need light touch from the brand.
Okay, so here's where I stand on something that I think has been sort of falling behind the curve for too long. At Omega, In theory, the Planet Ocean is the flagship of the Seamaster family. They haven't had a full top-to-bottom line redesign since 2016.
And it's frustrating because they've had dozens of references.
And I will say this, they're technically impressive, but they're huge. They're at least 2 steps behind the current taste for thinner watches and smaller watches. And they lead in technology, but not in style anymore. And I think they need to get a lot thinner. I think they need to get smaller. And it might even require a movement, like a new fundamental core movement that starts thinner to begin with.
Yeah, that's a really good one, because they've tried to redesign Planet Ocean to.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't want to say no avail, but next to no avail.
There have been new models that are different. There's the Ultra Deep, which is very different from the other ones, especially the one with the loop lugs. And then there's the Planet Ocean World Timer, which is its own kind of unique. But to just redo the conventional chronograph, GMT, and diver, and have a new core of the collection designed from the metal up, I think the time has come for that. I would also say that Vacheron. Now, we're approaching 10 years since
Gen
the
3.
Overseas was last redesigned. It was years ahead of its time with the features it offered, but I do feel like with independents like Chapek and options like the Alpine Eagle for a lot less money, you are witnessing an erosion of that advantage. And if it weren't for the fact that AP and Patek have mostly stood pat and not advanced the state of the art, Vacheron would be under a lot more pressure. They are under pressure from the independents, and I think the Overseas needs a Generation 4 to stay ahead.
I can absolutely see that, and the Generation 4 should be a major step up. And I think about this a lot. Tim, you are the one who taught me that Generation 1 had black polished interior bracelet, and I feel like I've actually not been able to stop thinking about that since you've said it. And I know that it's the inside of the bracelet. I know that it's really kind of meaningless, but it's not. It's so not. If Vacheron came out with a Gen 4 Overseas and did that to the bracelet, did a poly noir bracelet finish, it would be so much for me just for that little piece of detail. And I'll start with saying this. I was a bit of a hater on Gen 3 when it came out because I really love Gen 2. I think Gen 2 is a really golden sweet spot for Overseas. I think it was a good sequel to Gen 1, and I think it was very faithful. I'm not saying that Gen 3 is not faithful, but I will say that 4520 series, or 4920? What is the new reference? 4920 or 4520?
I think the new one is 4520.
So 4520's era over 4500 era for sure, because they have made some adjustments.
Yeah, there have been some changes to the quick release, which are welcome, and the clasp.
Taper in the bracelet is a little bit more. So I think you're really onto something with a 4th gen Overseas. I don't know quite what they would do bezel proportion wise, but in terms of, if we get granular with complications, okay, make the dual time 41 millimeters.
Maybe bring back a jumbo style ultra thin.
Yeah, give us a 2000 V again. Give us that in. I mean, 37's perfect. Don't get me wrong, but give us that in 39 if you want to make a major difference. Make everything else 41, make that 39. Make your make your dual time 41.
Agreed. The general advice there is smaller.
Yeah.
In every dimension.
Yeah, and make it a meaningful difference. Don't look at your stock of bracelets and say, okay, we can use these bracelets for the next generation too. Don't do that. You have to do a redesign.
I agree with that. I would also say that now here's an idea. Patek has done well and avoided the pitfall of the Royal Oak by having a junior sports watch in the collection since 1997. Should Vacheron have a junior sports watch alongside the Overseas?
No, but that leads me to something else.
Okay.
Aquanaut needs to be redesigned.
I agree with you 100%. Other than a new movement, which is, okay, now it hacks.
Now it hacks, great, about time.
But the 5167 has been around now since, I guess, 2007. Yeah. I mean, that's approaching 2 decades, the same reference, especially since we now have a 5811. I feel like we need to see a turnover in the Aquanaut core reference with changes.
Could not agree more. And 2026 is the 50th anniversary of the Nautilus. It is not an anniversary for the Aquanaut, but I feel like they could clean slate some things. They really could. I know that they won't, but they really could clean slate some things. But sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead. What type of junior sports watch would you see from Vacheron, and why should it have been Kay DeLille?
Well, I mean, at first, the Kay DeLille, which at the very end of the run was automatic, fully loomed stainless steel in 100 meters. It gained those features over the years, but that's how it ended. That proved you could have two sports watches in the collection. Now, what I'm thinking is you don't necessarily want to have something that feels like a baby overseas, because no one wants a junior anything. You know what I mean? It has to have its own soul, and one way Patek did that with the Aquanaut back in the day was putting on a strap right out of the gate. So that made it feel very different from the Nautilus. The other thing, too, is that Vacheron does have a little bit of a sports watch history that is not related to either the 222 or the overseas. And I think that on the basis of the old Vacheron Thunderbird, you could have a 100-meter watch, stainless steel, fully, or titanium.
Yeah.
Or titanium, fully loomed with a rotating bezel that's almost like a vintage aviator's style watch and true to their own history. And then you've got something you can take swimming, you can put on a strap, you can dress it down in a way that, you know, the overseas doesn't have to have like a bracelet and a strap in the same box.
Awesome.
Yeah. What is it? Was it like 6782? Like what was it?
What is the reference? Let's see here. Yeah, 6782. You're spot on.
So bring that back, not as an historique, unless you want there to be a water-resistant, swimmable, loomed historique model. That might be interesting in its own right. I would rather bring back something that's a little bit bigger, something that's 40 millimeters, something that's a bit more robust, something that has a fully loomed dial, and do it in base metals. You know, do it in titanium, do it in steel.
Yeah.
Maybe do it in tantalum, but find a way to give it its own identity. So we've got another sports watch in the Vacheron catalog, so you don't turn into the overseas company the way Audemars Piguet has turned into the Royal Oak Company. And then that gives you something you can market against the Aquanaut that's also something the Aquanaut is not, which is a sort of pilot's watch.
Yeah, yeah. I think when we think of sports watch, we think we don't jump to anything other than, hey, this is water resistant, it can go places. And I think like kind of this is looking left to that center, and the fact that it is kind of pilot center is cool. Give it usable water resistance, obviously. Give it a screw down crown, obviously, but make it not obviously a water watch.
Now, here's an independent that really needs to up its game, and I say this from a place of respect, but since 2011, all of the FP Journe line sport mechanical models have been 30 meters with a push-down crown. In a world where the Quartz Elegant has a screw-down crown, and I know it's internally tested to 50 meters, even though it's rated 30, there's only ever been one safe-to-swim Journe sports watch. If you're really going to be selling these things for the prices you are with the wait lists you've got, they need to be swimmable, and it needs to be crystal clear, either a 100-meter push-down crown or 50 meters with a screw down. But these Journe line sport watches really need to be explicitly advertised as safe for water, or they're not sports watches. That's how I feel. It's been too long. And I feel like everyone else making this type of watch understands that it needs to be able to go in water, that this is a watch people are going to wear all the time. It shouldn't be hiding in like your shoe by the side of the pool at a hotel. It's too valuable for that. It needs to be on your wrist. So please, swimmable water resistance FP Journe. And I say this also from a position of respect, but I think Philippe Dufour needs a final chapter that's more than just making the one watch forever. I would like to see him push the limits again and show us all why he's regarded as the greatest living watchmaker.
That is a great cap to this, because I don't want to call that type of manufacturer an elephant in the room, but you're right. You're so right. You're spot on. The world has moved on, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think he was probably taken aback, because it was originally Japanese collectors who asked for this in the late 90s. But after a career in which he created the first ever wristwatch, Grande et Petite Sonnerie, where he created those incredible complicated pocket watches for AP, 6,000 man-hours per pocket watch, entirely handmade, he proved that he could do anything. And I think even he was shocked at the acclaim and the widespread fame and mainstream popularity and commercial success that came from building the simplest watch of his career.
Yeah.
And he's been maybe riding that wave of shock and success now for 2.5 decades, but he's got so much more in him. You know, it almost feels like Paul McCartney going out playing all the same songs from the 60s. You know, show us how great you are and that you can still do it.
Give us wings.
Yeah, exactly. Do it one more time. Be a hit maker. Philippe Dufour, more than Paul McCartney, has the ability to do that and show us something we haven't seen.
I would never have guessed Philippe Dufour would have made it onto this list, but it's very well said.
Yeah, with Omega and the Planet Ocean. Okay, guys, reach out to us. We are podcasts at the1916company.com for all of your suggestions and questions. Armand, where can they find us online?
You can find me on Instagram at It's Me Armand or via email at armand@the1916company.com.
And I'm everywhere, but you can find me at my best on Instagram at Tim_Masso. And until next time, time out.